Impeachment proceedings launched against South Korea's president. A vote could take place as early as this coming Friday. This after that failed attempt 24 hours ago by Yoon to impose martial law. Liza Herbert has more.
A candlelit vigil in Seoul continued the mass mobilisation against Yoon. Just hours after the South Korean president declared martial law, he was forced to rescind it, and his political future is on the brink.
Fortunately, we could stop him, but the thing is, still those who tried this crazy move, they are still in their seat, and until they step down, we don't feel we are safe enough.
These demonstrators are not the only ones who want to see him held accountable. South Korea's largest labour union has called for an indefinite general strike until Yoon resigns. And the country's main opposition has tabled a motion to impeach the president over what they called insurrectionary behaviour.
By blocking lawmakers' access to the National Assembly and allowing armed soldiers and police officers to forcibly enter the Parliament building, Yoon has committed the crime of rebellion, undermining the Constitution.
To be successful, at least 200 votes, or 2/3 of South Korea's 300-member National Assembly, have to support the motion. A trial would then be held before South Korea's Constitutional Court. If 6 of the 9-member council vote for it to be sustained, Yoon will be removed from office. It was a rapid backfire for the president. Yoon imposed martial law without warning on Tuesday night, vowing to eliminate, quote, anti-state forces. In a few tense hours, armed officers and army helicopters then surrounded Parliament. The country that was chafed under military dictatorship for decades responded swiftly to the bombshell announcement. Demonstrators took to the streets and opposition leaders accused him of trying to suppress democracy. Defying police, they forced their way back inside the building. 190 lawmakers then passed a unanimous vote to block the martial law.
And as you heard in that report, a call for a general strike by trade unions. Yana Lee has more.
The pressure's on for South Korea's President Yoon to take responsibility for his actions on Tuesday evening. The opposition wants him to step down and face the music. If not, they say they will force him out. An impeachment in South Korea requires 2/3 of the parliament to vote with them. That's 200 people, and the opposition and its allies, as well as a few independent lawmakers, all tallied up, say that they are just missing 8 votes. So 8 lawmakers from the ruling Conservative People's Power Party to vote alongside them for this to work. As you can imagine, a lot of closed-door meetings have been taking place throughout the day. It won't be a complete shoo-in. It's not going to be as easy as one might think. The vote in Parliament then is likely to take place either on Friday or on Saturday, because legally there's a 72-hour window in which this has to take place. And if this vote passes, then there's also a second step for impeachment here as well in South Korea. What is required is a constitutional court decision as well. It has to go to trial, and this could last 6 months, and they will or will not confirm the impeachment. 6 of the 9 judges would have to vote yes. Public pressure here could make a bit of a difference. If you remember back in 2016, when the then South Korean President Park Geun-hye faced an impeachment vote in Parliament before she managed to wait out that constitutional court trial, there were huge protests. The protest against her got bigger and bigger towards the end. There were 500,000, 700,000 at one point. Organizers said 1 million people on the streets at these weekly protests. And then if this is to happen, the president who has been impeached by Parliament will then be officially impeached with that seal on from the Constitutional Court at the end of that 6-month investigation.
Yana Lee reporting from Seoul, the South Korean capital, where it is gone 2 a.m. And we can speak with John Nilsson-Wright, senior fellow for Northern Asia at the Asia program at the think tank Chatham House. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Pleasure.
And thank you for burning the midnight oil on what's been a a momentous 24 hours where you are. First off, what was the mood for you walking around the South Korean capital this Wednesday?
I think there's a mood of cautious optimism on the part of the South Korean public. Obviously, what they've been through, the shock and awe, if you like, of the declaration by the president late at night, had, I think, impressed on people the urgency of the situation to rally, to find a means of expressing their discontent. Relief that the National Assembly had met in a way that was decisive and cast that vote, annulling the order of martial law. And I think a sense that now the institutions of government are working in the right way to hold their president to account for his illegal action. But there remains, I think, important questions about what that will actually amount to in the next few days. And as your report was pointing out, we are expecting a vote tomorrow, which should usher in, I think, the procedure that will enforce the will of the National Assembly. I think there is a question really now about President Yoon and his priorities. We've already seen members of his own cabinet resign to tender their resignation in protest against his actions. Those resignations have not been accepted. And if the impeachment vote passes, as I think is extremely likely.
Extremely likely? Because the votes are not quite there for an impeachment.
Well, I mean, I do think if you look at the public media discourse, and if you look at those conservatives who themselves voted as part of that initial vote, I think it would be extraordinary if the Conservatives bloc, if you like, the PPP, decided not to endorse this decision by the National Assembly. This action, is such a threat to the integrity of the democratic process. And already, we were seeing in the run-up to the impeachment, to the decision, the announcement of martial law, we saw plenty of Conservatives who themselves were privately challenging the government. There were reports that there were Conservatives who were leaking information that was discrediting the president. So it would be extraordinary if the vote was not carried. And we're talking about 200 votes. So I suppose it is possible, but that would really place us back in a constitutional crisis of enormous proportions. So I do think that it's really very much incumbent now on the elected officials to do their political duty, if you like.
John, let me ask you, because 24 hours ago, whether we were speaking to journalists or analysts, everybody was shocked by this attempt to declare martial law. Nobody saw this coming. Have you had time to make sense of it?
Yes, I mean, I think the prevailing view, talking to experienced Koreans here, both civil servants, politicians, academics, I mean, I think there is a sense that President Yoon, given his lack of political experience, given his own authoritarian tendencies, and given the fact that he was politically cornered, acted in a way that seemed either stupid or impulsive or politically naive or some combination of all three, thinking that it would be possible for him to carry out the imposition of martial law. But what was really striking, of course, was that none of the ingredients of martial law, the control of the media, the use of the military, were evident. I mean, there was the decision to send troops to the National Assembly to try and prevent those elected politicians from doing precisely what they've not been able to do, which was to try and actually block the vote. In the course of that response, it was very clear that the broad majority of public opinion was strongly opposed to this action. And those voices will continue to be expressed. We've seen demonstrations here just a few minutes away from my hotel where I'm speaking to you tonight in Gwanghwamun, one of the main public fora, if you like, in central Seoul. Very clear expression of the opposition of mainstream Koreans. And that movement will build if the president doesn't resign or doesn't bow to the pressure coming from the National Assembly.
And we heard one lawmaker talking about how he had to climb the gates of Parliament to get in. A lawmaker of 60 years old who lived through the last time martial law was declared in 1980. A reminder that South Korea's democracy was hard fought with those student protests of the 1980s. Is that a generational thing, or is that in the collective memory of everybody where you are?
I think it's the latter. I mean, there's no doubt that, of course, 44 years ago or thereabouts, ordinary Koreans fought aggressively and fearlessly to protect their emerging democratic rights. And the events of 1980 were really a catalyst for the emergence of a vibrant liberal democratic state. That memory is ingrained in public consciousness. We see it reflected in popular literature, in film. The winner of the Nobel Prize, Han Kang, her own novels reflect that historical moment and very much a part of her experience and the experience of people like her, a generation that maybe didn't experience directly those events, but certainly it's part of their mental framework, their national identity. And I think what's interesting, again, coming back to this question of the vote tomorrow, is that no politician can afford to be ignorant of the significance of that. And so much of what, this is part of the tragedy, President Yoon has been trying to do in his foreign policy, in emphasizing the rule of law, in stressing the importance of South Korea's contribution to global order, is also expressing some of that democratic identity. So it would be inconceivable, I think, if those elected politicians and public opinion were not able to prevail tomorrow.
One final question for you. I'm sitting here in Western Europe, many time zones away. The last time we ever experienced anything like this was in Spain in 1981, but it was only 6 years after the death of General Franco. It's been a lot longer since South Korea's had military rule. Again, it's this question of why now?
Why now? I suppose... if you look at the nature of politics in South Korea, we've seen in so many countries across the world, in the United States, dare I say it, also in France, where populist politics is creating sharp political divisions, questions of legitimacy, questions of political agency, all of the churn, if you like, of adversarial politics and the emotion that underlies adversarial politics is also very present in South Korea. And we see a kind of left-wing and right-wing populism where individual political parties do not see their political opponents as legitimate, as representing, if you like, the national interest. And there are some people on the right, aligned with President Yoon, who've made similar arguments, who've denounced their political opponents as being, as President Yoon has tried to characterize the left in some ways, unpatriotic. And that is, I think, part of the reason why the division between the progressive forces and the conservative ones has been so pronounced. But ordinary Koreans do feel that their democratic political institutions need to be able to function. And the application of martial law, based on what is in effect a pretext, this bogus claim that North Korea was somehow infiltrating the political left in South Korea, has been roundly rejected by so many people across the political spectrum, which is why I'm confident that this impeachment vote will be successful.
John Nilsson-Wright, so many thanks for speaking with us from Seoul.
Pleasure.